The hunger felt like a living thing inside Clara Kennedy's belly, gnawing at her insides with such ferocity that she could barely stand upright as she stumbled down the dusty main street of Provo, Utah Territory, in the scorching summer of 1878. She clutched the silver locket against her chest, the last remnant of her mother's memory, the final piece of her old life before the consumption took both her parents and left her wandering westward with nothing but hope and determination, both of which had long since abandoned her on this God-forsaken journey. The general store loomed ahead like a mirage, its weathered sign creaking in the hot wind that swept down from the Wasatch Mountains. Clara's legs trembled beneath her worn calico dress, the fabric so thin now that it barely provided modesty, let alone protection from the elements. She had not eaten in 3 days, having given her last coins to a family with small children 2 towns back, unable to watch them starve when she at least had youth and strength on her side. That strength had proven more finite than she had imagined. Inside the store, the proprietor looked up from his ledger, his round face registering surprise, and then poorly concealed distaste at her disheveled appearance. Clara knew what she must look like, her auburn hair hanging in tangles around her dirt-smudged face, her green eyes hollow with exhaustion and desperation. She was only 19 years old, but she felt ancient, worn down by the cruel realities of life in the territories. "I need food," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, throat parched and raw. "Please, I can pay." The proprietor's eyebrows rose skeptically as she approached the counter, her hand opening to reveal the locket. In the dim light filtering through the dusty windows, the silver gleamed, intricately engraved with delicate roses and vines. It was beautiful, clearly valuable, and unmistakably the last thing in the world she wanted to part with. "My mother's," Clara explained, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks. "It is solid silver, worth far more than what I need, just some bread, some dried meat, anything." The man picked up the locket with thick fingers, examining it with a practiced eye. He opened it, revealing the tiny daguerreotype inside, a young woman with Clara's same eyes staring out from the faded image. He snapped it shut with a decisive click. "I will give you $2 worth of provisions," he said flatly. Clara's heart sank. The locket was worth at least 20, but she had no strength left to argue, no energy to bargain or plead. She simply nodded, accepting the meager bag of hardtack, some dried beef, and a small sack of cornmeal he pushed across the counter. She turned to leave, cradling the food like it was gold, when the door burst open with such force that she stumbled backward. A man filled the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, silhouetted against the harsh afternoon sun. As he stepped inside, Clara could make out his features more clearly. He was young, perhaps 25, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and striking blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy, leather chaps over sturdy denim, a dust-covered shirt, and a well-worn Stetson that he removed as he entered, revealing a face tanned by endless days under the sun. "Afternoon, Mr. Peters," he said to the proprietor, his voice deep and pleasant, carrying a hint of Texas in the drawl. Then those blue eyes landed on Clara, and she saw something shift in his expression, a flicker of concern crossing his handsome features. Clara ducked her head and tried to move past him, but her weakness betrayed her. She swayed on her feet, and suddenly strong hands gripped her arms, steadying her with surprising gentleness. "Easy there, miss," the cowboy said, his face close enough that she could see the worry lines creasing his forehead. "When did you last eat?" "I am fine," Clara lied, pulling away from his touch even as her body screamed at her to accept any help offered. Pride was a foolish luxury, but it was all she had left besides the paltry provisions in her bag. The cowboy looked from her to the proprietor, then to the silver locket sitting on the counter. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That locket," he said slowly. "How much did you pay for it, Peters?" The proprietor's face reddened. "That is my business, Tyler Ingram. The transaction is complete, Tyler Ingram." The name seemed to hang in the air between them. Clara watched as this Tyler picked up the locket, examining it with the same care the proprietor had shown, but with something else in his eyes, something that looked like anger. "You gave her $2 of goods for this," he said, and it was not a question. Solid silver, hand-engraved with a portrait inside, worth at least $25, probably more to the right buyer. "She agreed to the trade," Peters protested, but his voice held a defensive note. Tyler pulled out a leather billfold from his vest pocket, counting out bills with deliberate precision. "Here is $30. I am buying the locket." Clara's mind reeled. $30 was a fortune to her, more money than she had seen since before her parents fell ill. But the locket was already gone, traded away in her desperation, and this stranger had no obligation to her. Tyler turned to her, pressing the locket into her palm and closing her fingers around it. "This belongs to you," he said firmly. "No one should have to give up their last piece of home just to eat." She stared at him, unable to form words, unable to comprehend this act of kindness from a complete stranger. The locket felt warm in her hand, warmed by his touch, and suddenly the tears she had been holding back spilled over, running in clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "I cannot accept this," she finally managed, but even as she said it, her fingers tightened around the precious object, unwilling to let it go again. "You already have," Tyler said, a small smile softening his angular face. "Now I think what you need is a proper meal and a place to rest. Mrs. Henderson runs a boarding house down the street. Clean rooms, good food, respectable establishment. Let me at least get you settled there for a few days." "Why?" The question burst from Clara's lips before she could stop it. "Why would you help me? You do not know me. I could be anyone." Tyler's blue eyes met hers steadily, and she saw no pity there, only a quiet understanding that somehow made her want to cry even harder. "Because someone helped me once when I had nothing," he said simply. "And because it is the right thing to do. My mother would turn in her grave if I saw a lady in distress, and did nothing." The mention of his mother, coupled with her own locket still clutched in her hand, broke through the last of Clara's resistance. She nodded, unable to trust her voice, and allowed him to guide her out of the general store and into the blazing afternoon heat. The boarding house was a neat two-story structure with a wide porch and cheerful yellow curtains in the windows. Mrs. Henderson turned out to be a plump, kind-faced woman in her 50s who took one look at Clara and immediately ushered her inside with a stream of comforting words and gentle hands. "You poor dear, look at you, thin as a rail and covered in road dust. Tyler Ingram, you did right bringing her here. We will get some food in her and a proper bath. Do not you worry." Tyler paid for a week's lodging before Clara could protest, adding extra for meals and anything else she might need. As Mrs. Henderson led her toward the stairs, Clara looked back at him, this stranger who had given her back not just her mother's locket but her dignity as well. "Thank you," she said, the words woefully inadequate for what she felt. "I do not know how I will ever repay you." "No repayment needed," Tyler said, settling his hat back on his head. "Just take care of yourself, Miss Kennedy, Clara Kennedy. Miss Kennedy, I am glad I could help." He turned to leave, but Mrs. Henderson called out, "Tyler Ingram, you come back tomorrow evening for supper. I will make that pot roast you like, and Miss Kennedy here will have had some rest and food in her. It is the least we can do." Tyler glanced back at Clara, and she saw something in his expression she could not quite name, a mix of curiosity and something warmer. "I would be honored, Mrs. Henderson." After he left, Clara allowed herself to be led upstairs to a small but immaculate room with a real bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Mrs. Henderson brought up hot water for washing and a plate of cold chicken, fresh bread, and preserved peaches that Clara devoured with unladylike speed. The older woman watched with satisfaction, then insisted Clara rest while she heated water for a proper bath. Alone in the quiet room, Clara opened the locket and stared at her mother's face. Clara Kennedy had been a beauty in her youth, refined and educated, the daughter of a Boston merchant who had scandalized her family by marrying Clara's father, a charming Irish immigrant with more dreams than money. They had been happy, though, building a modest but comfortable life in St. Louis until the sickness came. Clara had nursed them both until the end, using up all their savings on doctors and medicines that did no good. When her father died, he had pressed this locket into her hand and made her promise to go west, to find a new life where the past could not weigh her down. She had honored that promise, but the journey had been far harder than she had ever imagined. Now, lying in a real bed with food in her belly and her mother's locket returned to her, Clara felt the first stirring of hope she had experienced in months. And threading through that hope was the memory of kind blue eyes and strong, gentle hands. The next day passed in a blur of rest and recovery. Mrs. Henderson brought up meals regularly, insisting Clara stay in bed despite her protests that she was well enough to be up and about. By the evening, however, Clara felt more like herself than she had in weeks. The boarding house owner had even provided a clean dress, simple blue cotton that had belonged to her daughter before she married and moved to Sacramento. "It will fit you better once we get some meat on those bones," Mrs. Henderson said with motherly concern, helping Clara fasten the buttons. "But you look presentable now, and that is what matters." Clara studied her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. The gauntness had not left her face, and her eyes still held shadows of the hardships she had endured, but the clean dress and freshly washed hair made her look human again, like a respectable young woman rather than a desperate vagrant. When Tyler arrived for supper, Clara was already downstairs in the dining room, helping Mrs. Henderson set the table despite the older woman's protests. She heard his boots on the porch steps and felt her heart give an unexpected flutter. When he entered the room, removing his hat as before, his eyes found her immediately, and the slow smile that spread across his face made warmth bloom in her chest. "Miss Kennedy," he said with a slight nod, "you look much recovered." "Thanks to you, Mr. Ingram," Clara replied, surprised by the steadiness of her voice. "I owe you a debt I fear I can never repay." "Tyler, please," he said, moving to help her with the heavy pot of stew Mrs. Henderson was attempting to carry from the kitchen. "And I told you no debt is owed." Throughout the meal, Clara learned more about her unexpected benefactor. Tyler had come to Utah Territory 5 years earlier, working as a ranch hand on the massive Ingram cattle operation that his uncle owned. He had been born in Texas, the youngest son of a family that lost everything in the aftermath of the war between the states. His uncle had offered him a chance at a new start, and Tyler had worked his way up from a green cowboy to the foreman of the entire operation. "It is hard work," he admitted, accepting a second helping of pot roast from Mrs. Henderson. "But honest work, and I have learned more in these 5 years than I ever could have back in Texas. My uncle is a good man, fair to his workers and smart about the business. He is teaching me everything about running a ranch." "You plan to have your own place someday?" Clara asked, genuinely curious. She found herself wanting to know everything about this man who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had been too tired to pray. "That is the dream," Tyler said, and his eyes took on a distant look. "There is land to the north, good grazing territory with water access. I have been saving my wages, learning what I can. Maybe in a few years I will have enough to start something of my own." "That sounds wonderful," Clara said softly. "To build something from nothing to make your own way. That takes courage." Tyler's gaze returned to her, and she felt pinned by the intensity of it. "Seems to me you have plenty of courage yourself, Miss Kennedy. Coming all this way alone, surviving what you have, that takes strength." Clara looked down at her plate, uncomfortable with the praise. "I did what I had to do. There was nothing left for me in St. Louis after my parents passed." "You have other family. Anyone here in the territories, Mrs. Henderson asked gently. "No," Clara admitted. "My father had a brother somewhere in California, but we lost touch with him years ago. My mother's family disowned her when she married my father. I am alone." The words hung heavy in the air, and Clara immediately regretted her honesty. She did not want pity, especially not from Tyler, whose opinion had begun to matter to her in ways she did not fully understand. But Tyler did not look at her with pity. Instead, his expression held something else, a kind of recognition, as if he understood what it meant to be truly alone in the world. "You are not alone now," Mrs. Henderson said firmly, patting Clara's hand. "You have friends here, dear, and Provo is a good town growing fast. There are opportunities for a smart, hard-working young woman." "What kind of work did you do before?" Tyler asked. "In St. Louis, I helped my mother with sewing," Clara said. "She took in work from some of the finer families, alterations and custom pieces. She taught me everything she knew. I can sew anything if I have the materials and tools." Mrs. Henderson's face lit up. "The seamstress here in town, Mrs. Abbott, has been looking for help. Her eyes are not what they used to be, and she has more work than she can handle with all the new families moving in. I could introduce you tomorrow if you are feeling up to it." Hope surged in Clara's chest. The possibility of work, of earning her own way again, was almost too good to believe. "I would be very grateful for an introduction. I can work hard, and I promise my stitching is fine." "I am sure it is," Tyler said, and the approval in his voice made Clara's cheeks warm. The evening passed pleasantly, with easy conversation and the comfortable atmosphere of new friendships forming. Tyler proved to be good company, with a dry sense of humor and a way of telling stories about ranch life that had both women laughing. He spoke of ornery cattle and stubborn horses, of sleeping under the stars during long drives and the camaraderie of the cowboys he worked alongside. When he finally took his leave, promising to check in on how the meeting with Mrs. Abbott went, Clara walked him to the door. In the warm evening air, with the sounds of Provo settling down for the night around them, they stood together on the porch. "Thank you again," Clara said, "for everything. You saved my life, Tyler, I mean that." "I am just glad I was in the right place at the right time," he replied. "And I hope the job with Mrs. Abbott works out. You deserve a fresh start, Clara." The use of her given name sent a little thrill through her. "I hope so too." Tyler settled his hat on his head, but he hesitated before stepping off the porch. "Would you mind if I called on you again? I would like to know how you are doing, if that would be acceptable." Clara's heart raced. "I would like that very much." His smile in the lamplight was warm and genuine. "Good night then, Clara Kennedy." "Good night, Tyler Ingram." She watched him walk away down the darkened street, his tall figure eventually disappearing around a corner. Only then did she allow herself to acknowledge the unfamiliar feeling blooming in her chest. It felt dangerously close to happiness. The meeting with Mrs. Abbott the next morning could not have gone better. The elderly seamstress, a sharp-eyed woman with silver hair and arthritic hands, tested Clara's skills with a series of increasingly complex tasks. Clara hemmed a pair of trousers, altered a dress bodice, and then repaired a torn lace collar with stitches so tiny and precise that Mrs. Abbott nodded with satisfaction. "You will do," the older woman said, which Clara learned was high praise indeed. "I can pay you 50 cents a day to start, with room for increase if your work continues to meet my standards. 6 days a week, Sundays off. You will work here in my shop, and I will teach you the business side as well as the stitching. Can you start tomorrow?" "Yes, absolutely," Clara said, hardly able to believe her good fortune. 50 cents a day would allow her to pay Mrs. Henderson back for the room and board, and even save a little if she was careful. Over the following weeks, Clara settled into a routine that felt like a gift after the chaos and uncertainty of her journey west. She worked long hours at the seamstress shop, her fingers flying over fabric as she repaired, altered, and created garments for the growing population of Provo. Mrs. Abbott proved to be an excellent teacher, sharing not just technical skills but also the business acumen needed to run a successful shop. And through it all, Tyler became a steady presence in her life. He called on her twice a week, always respectful, always proper, sometimes bringing small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, fresh apples from the ranch. They would walk together through town in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories and dreams. Clara discovered that beneath Tyler's quiet strength lay a thoughtful soul who loved reading as much as she did, who had opinions about everything from politics to the proper way to break a young horse. He was patient and kind, but also possessed a core of steel that showed itself when anyone treated others unfairly. She saw it one evening when a drunk cowboy made crude comments to a young woman walking alone. Tyler had stepped in without hesitation, his usually warm voice turning cold as granite as he escorted the frightened girl home, and had words with the offender that sent him scurrying away. "I cannot stand men who think their strength gives them the right to intimidate others," Tyler said afterward, still tense with anger. "It is the exact opposite of what strength should be used for." Clara had never felt safer than when she was with him. As autumn painted the mountains in brilliant golds and reds, Clara realized she was falling in love. It crept up on her in quiet moments, the way her heart lifted when she saw Tyler walking toward the boarding house, the way she found herself saving up small stories and observations to share with him, the way his laugh made her feel warm from the inside out. She tried to be cautious to protect her heart, but it was a losing battle. Tyler showed her in 100 small ways that he cared for her, that she mattered to him beyond simple kindness to someone in need. He remembered everything she told him, asked thoughtful questions about her work, and spoke of the future in ways that seemed to include her without ever being presumptuous. One crisp October evening, Tyler arrived at the boarding house with a horse saddled for her alongside his own. "I thought you might like to see the ranch," he said, his expression hopeful but tentative, as if afraid she might refuse. "It is a beautiful ride, and my uncle has been wanting to meet you. I have mentioned you to him." Clara's pulse quickened. Meeting Tyler's uncle felt significant, a step forward in whatever was developing between them. "I would love to," she said, accepting his help mounting the gentle mare he had brought for her. The ride out of town took them north along a well-worn trail that followed a creek lined with cottonwoods. Tyler pointed out landmarks, told her the names of the distant peaks, and helped her when the terrain grew rough. Clara had not ridden much, but the mare was patient, and Tyler's presence beside her made her feel confident. The Ingram ranch sprawled across a valley, with the main house a sturdy two-story structure built of logs and stone. Corrals and outbuildings dotted the property, and cattle grazed in the distance, their shapes dark against the golden grass. It was beautiful and prosperous, clearly the result of years of hard work. Tyler's uncle, Thomas Ingram, turned out to be a gruff but kind man in his 60s with Tyler's same blue eyes and a handshake that could crush stone. His wife, Aunt Margaret, was a gracious woman who immediately pulled Clara inside for coffee and cake, asking about her work and life in Provo with genuine interest. "Tyler has spoken of you often," Margaret said, her eyes twinkling. "It is good to finally put a face to the name." Throughout the afternoon, Clara observed Tyler in his element, watching how he interacted with the ranch hands who clearly respected him, how he moved with confidence through the stables and corrals, pointing out different horses and explaining the workings of the ranch with obvious pride. This was his world, she realized, and he was inviting her into it. Before they left, Thomas pulled Tyler aside for a conversation Clara could not hear. But when Tyler returned to her, his expression was thoughtful and pleased. On the ride back to town, with the sun setting in a blaze of orange and purple behind the mountains, Tyler was quieter than usual. Clara sensed he was working up to saying something important, and her heart hammered in anticipation. Finally, as they neared the edge of Provo, Tyler drew his horse to a stop near a stand of aspen trees. Clara stopped beside him, waiting. "Clara," he began, then paused, seeming to struggle for words. "These past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, it has meant more to me than I can properly express." "It has meant a great deal to me as well," Clara said softly, hardly daring to breathe. "When I first saw you in that general store, so desperate and alone, something inside me just knew that you were important, that you were going to change everything for me." He turned in his saddle to face her fully. "I have fallen in love with you, Clara Kennedy. Completely and irrevocably in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, and Clara felt tears spring to her eyes, but these were tears of joy, of relief, of answered hopes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I tried to be sensible and cautious, but I could not help it. You are the best man I have ever known, Tyler Ingram." The smile that broke across Tyler's face was like sunrise. He dismounted quickly, then reached up to help her down, his hands strong and sure on her waist. For a moment they stood close together, the horses forgotten, the whole world narrowed down to just the two of them. "I want to court you properly," Tyler said, taking her hands in his. "I want everyone to know that you are my girl, that I intend to marry you if you will have me. I know it is fast, and I know you might want more time, but Clara, I have never been more certain of anything in my life." "Yes," Clara said, laughing through her tears. "Yes to all of it. I will be your girl, and yes, when the time is right, I will marry you. I am certain too." Tyler pulled her into his arms then, holding her close, and Clara pressed her face against his chest, hearing the rapid beat of his heart that matched her own. When he tilted her chin up and kissed her, it was gentle and sweet, full of promise and love. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Clara's life. Tyler courted her with a combination of old-fashioned propriety and genuine devotion that made her fall deeper in love with him every day. He brought her wildflowers picked from the mountain meadows, took her on picnics by the creek, and sat in Mrs. Henderson's parlor in the evenings reading aloud while Clara sewed, their knees almost touching in the lamplight. Mrs. Abbott noticed the change in her young employee and approved wholeheartedly. "That Tyler Ingram is a good man," she said one afternoon as they worked together on a wedding dress for a local rancher's daughter. "Steady and hardworking with prospects. You could do far worse, my girl." "I know," Clara said, unable to keep the smile from her face. "I feel like the luckiest woman in the world." As winter approached, Tyler grew more serious about their future. He took Clara out to the land he had been saving for, a beautiful stretch of valley with a creek running through it and mountains rising on three sides. Snow dusted the peaks, and the air was crisp and cold, but Clara could see what Tyler saw: the potential, the promise of something built together. "My uncle is going to loan me some cattle to start," Tyler explained as they stood on a slight rise overlooking the property. "I have almost enough saved for building materials. By spring, I could start construction on a house. It would not be fancy at first, just a cabin really, but it would be ours, Clara. A place to begin." Clara imagined it, a small house on this land, a garden, perhaps some chickens, and her heart swelled with longing. "It would be perfect," she said. "I do not need fancy, Tyler, I just need you." He turned to her, his eyes intense. "Then marry me. Marry me now this winter. We can stay with my aunt and uncle until the cabin is built, or rent a place in town. I know I said I wanted to court you properly, give you time, but I do not want to wait any longer. I want you as my wife, Clara. I want to start our life together." Clara did not hesitate. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." They were wed on a cold December morning in the small church in Provo, with Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Abbott standing up as witnesses alongside Tyler's aunt and uncle. Clara wore a dress she and Mrs. Abbott had made together, cream-colored wool with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Tyler wore a new suit that his aunt had ordered from Salt Lake City. And when he saw Clara walking toward him down the aisle, the expression on his face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, their vows spoken clearly and from the heart. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Tyler kissed her with such tenderness that Clara felt her knees go weak. The small reception at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house was filled with warmth and laughter. The community that had welcomed Clara and supported her had turned out to celebrate with them, bringing food and gifts and well wishes. As Clara stood beside her new husband, accepting congratulations and thanks from neighbors and friends, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed. Less than 6 months ago, she had been starving and desperate, trading away her last precious possession just to survive another day. Now she stood as Mrs. Tyler Ingram, loved and cherished, part of a community with a future stretching bright before her. That night, in the room Tyler had rented at a different boarding house to give them privacy, they came together as husband and wife with a mixture of nervousness and joy. Tyler was gentle and patient, and Clara felt safe in his arms, loved in a way she had never imagined possible. They talked long into the night, making plans and dreaming dreams, and when Clara finally fell asleep with her head on Tyler's chest, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. They spent the winter living in a small rented house on the edge of Provo. Clara continued working with Mrs. Abbott during the days while Tyler divided his time between helping his uncle at the ranch and preparing for their own property. He ordered lumber and supplies, hired a few ranch hands who needed winter work, and began the slow process of turning raw land into a home. Every Sunday after church, they would ride out to the property together, and Clara would watch as slowly, steadily, a cabin began to take shape. Tyler and his crew worked through the cold months, and by the time spring arrived with its promise of renewal, the basic structure stood complete: a sturdy 4-room cabin with a stone fireplace, glass windows, and a covered porch that faced the mountains. Clara threw herself into making it a home. She sewed curtains for the windows, quilts for the bed, and tablecloths for the rough-hewn table Tyler built. Mrs. Abbott, who had come to care for Clara like a daughter, gave them dishes and cooking pots as a wedding gift. The community came together to help them move in, and on a warm May evening in 1879, Clara and Tyler spent their first night in their own home on their own land. Standing on the porch in the twilight, wrapped in Tyler's arms, Clara looked out at the land that was now theirs and felt overwhelming gratitude. "What are you thinking?" Tyler asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I am thinking about that day in the general store," Clara said. "When I traded my mother's locket for food. I was so desperate, so certain that my life was over, that I would die alone on some dusty road with no one to even bury me properly." Tyler's arms tightened around her. "I hate thinking about you suffering like that. But do you not see?" Clara turned in his embrace to face him. "That desperate moment led to this. It led to you buying back the locket, to you showing me such incredible kindness. If I had not been at my lowest point, we might never have met. God works in mysterious ways, my mother used to say. I believe that now. I walked into that store planning to buy some tobacco and ammunition," Tyler said with a small smile. "Instead, I found my whole future." They kissed as the stars began to appear overhead, and Clara silently thanked whatever force had brought them together, that had taken her moment of greatest desperation and transformed it into a beginning rather than an ending. The first year of marriage was one of hard work and deep happiness. Tyler proved to be everything Clara had believed him to be: steady, loving, hardworking, and devoted. They rose before dawn and often worked until dark, building their ranch from nothing. Tyler's uncle made good on his promise, providing them with 50 head of cattle to start their herd. Tyler hired 2 cowboys to help manage the stock, young men not much older than Clara, who lived in the small bunkhouse Tyler had built near the main cabin. Clara discovered she loved ranch life more than she had expected. She tended a large garden, kept chickens, and learned to preserve food for the winter months. She also continued doing some sewing work, taking on special projects for extra money that she and Tyler carefully saved. More than the work itself, she loved the partnership she and Tyler had built, the way they made decisions together, supported each other through setbacks, and celebrated every small victory. There were challenges, of course. That first summer brought a drought that had them worried about water for the cattle. A late spring blizzard killed several calves and destroyed part of their hay crop. There were times when money was so tight that Clara had to get creative with meals, stretching every ingredient as far as it would go. But through it all, they had each other. On the hardest days, Tyler would pull Clara close and remind her how far they had come, how much they had already overcome. And Clara, practical and determined, would make plans and find solutions, her needlework bringing in just enough extra to tide them over until cattle sales improved their finances. By their first anniversary, the ranch was beginning to thrive. Their herd had grown to 70 head, and Tyler's reputation for honest dealing and quality stock was spreading. They talked increasingly of the future, of expanding the herd, maybe buying some horses to raise alongside the cattle, and they talked about children. Clara discovered she was pregnant in the autumn of 1879, nearly a year to the day from when she had first stumbled into Provo. She told Tyler one evening after supper, watching nervously as various emotions played across his face: surprise, joy, wonder, and finally, pure delight. "A baby," he said, his voice hushed with awe. "Clara, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, though his expression made the answer obvious. Instead of answering with words, Tyler swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the small cabin before setting her down gently, as if she were suddenly made of glass. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said, pressing his hand to her still flat stomach. "A child, our child. Clara, you have given me everything." "You gave me everything first," she reminded him, thinking of that day in the general store, of the locket he had bought back and returned to her, of all the ways he had rescued her from despair. The pregnancy progressed well through the winter months. Tyler became almost comically protective, insisting Clara rest more and work less, taking over tasks he deemed too strenuous. His Aunt Margaret visited often, bringing advice and baby clothes she had saved from when her own children were small. Mrs. Abbott and Mrs. Henderson threw Clara a small party, gifting her with tiny gowns and blankets they had made. Through it all, Clara felt cocooned in love and support. The frightened, desperate girl who had traded her last possession for food felt like another person, someone from a past life. This Clara was strong and secure, building a family with the man she loved, part of a community that valued her. Their son was born on a warm June evening in 1880, arriving quickly and with lusty cries that announced his arrival to the world. Tyler, who had been banished from the bedroom by his aunt and the midwife, burst back in the moment he was allowed, his face pale with worry until he saw Clara propped up on pillows, tired but glowing, their baby in her arms. "A son," Clara said softly, watching as Tyler approached almost reverently. "We have a son, Tyler." Tyler sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring at the tiny red face peeking out from the blanket. When the baby opened his eyes, revealing blue eyes like his father's, Tyler's face crumpled and tears streamed down his cheeks. "He is perfect," Tyler whispered. "You are both perfect. Thank you, Clara. Thank you for him, for this life, for everything." They named him James Thomas Ingram, after both their fathers. Little James proved to be a good baby, healthy and strong, and watching Tyler with their son filled Clara with even deeper love for her husband. He was a natural father, patient and gentle, singing lullabies in his deep voice and walking the floor at night when James was fussy so Clara could rest. The ranch continued to grow along with their family. By the time James was walking and getting into everything, their herd numbered over 100 head. Tyler had built a proper barn and expanded the bunkhouse to accommodate 4 full-time ranch hands. Clara's garden flourished, and she had begun selling her preserves and baked goods in town, building a tidy side business that gave her satisfaction and independence. Life fell into a rhythm of work and family, challenges and joys. There were hard seasons and good ones, times when they struggled and times when they prospered. Through it all, Clara and Tyler's love for each other only deepened, tempered and strengthened by the life they were building together. When James was 3, Clara found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was harder, and Clara spent the last months resting more than she wanted, frustrated by her body's limitations but determined to do what was best for the baby. Tyler hired a girl from town to help with cooking and cleaning, and he took over even more of the household tasks, never complaining, always supportive. Their daughter arrived in late winter of 1884, smaller than James had been but just as healthy, with her mother's auburn hair and green eyes. They named her Sarah, after Clara's mother, and Clara wept as she held her daughter, thinking of the mother who had never gotten to meet her grandchildren, who had pressed that silver locket into Clara's hands with shaking fingers and made her promise to live, to find happiness. "She would be so proud of you," Tyler said softly, sitting beside his wife and daughter. "Your mother, she would be proud of the woman you have become, the life you have built." "The life we have built," Clara corrected. "I could not have done any of this without you, Tyler." "You saved me, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Tyler insisted. "I was just going through the motions before I met you, working hard but not really living. You gave me purpose, Clara. You gave me a reason to build something lasting, to dream bigger than I ever had before." As their children grew, The ranch flourished. Tyler's instincts for cattle ranching proved sound, and the Ingram name became associated with quality stock throughout the territory. They were able to buy adjoining land, expanding their holdings, and Tyler began breeding horses as well, a venture that proved surprisingly profitable. Clara's sewing skills had not gone to waste either. As Provo grew into a proper city, her reputation for fine needlework spread. She took on special commissions, creating wedding dresses and christening gowns, formal wear for the growing number of wealthy families in the area. She worked from home, able to care for her children while also contributing to the family finances in ways that made her feel accomplished and fulfilled. Through the years, Clara never forgot where she had come from, the desperation that had brought her to Provo and the kindness that had saved her. She and Tyler made it a point to help others when they could, hiring drifters who needed work, providing food to families struggling through hard times, offering second chances to people others had written off. "You never know what someone is capable of when given a chance," Clara would say. "I was nothing and no one, trading my last possession just to eat another day. And look at me now. Everyone deserves that opportunity." One autumn evening when James was 10 and Sarah was 6, a family showed up at their door as darkness fell. The parents looked exhausted, the 3 small children thin and scared. They had been traveling for weeks, heading west to California where the father hoped to find work. But their wagon had broken an axle a few miles back and they had no money for repairs. Clara saw her younger self in the mother's desperate eyes and immediately invited them in. Tyler and the ranch hands went out to retrieve the wagon and fix the axle, while Clara fed the family and gave them beds for the night. The next morning, Tyler not only finished repairing their wagon but loaded it with supplies and gave them enough money to get them through to California. "Why?" the father asked, his voice breaking. "Why would you help us? We are strangers. We have nothing to give you in return." Tyler and Clara exchanged a look, and Clara spoke. "Because someone helped us once when we needed it most. Because kindness should be passed forward. Because you and your children deserve a chance at a better life." As they watched the family drive away, Clara leaned against Tyler, feeling the solid warmth of him, the security and love that had become as natural as breathing. "You ever think about that day?" Tyler asked. "The day we met." "Often," Clara admitted. "I think about how close I came to dying on some dusty road. I think about how hungry and scared and alone I was. And then I think about you walking into that store, about you buying back my mother's locket, about how one act of kindness changed everything." "I think about it too," Tyler said. "I think about what my life would be without you, and I cannot even imagine it. You and the children, this ranch, everything we have built, none of it would exist if I had walked into that store 5 minutes later, or if I had decided to go the next day instead." "You believe in fate?" Clara asked. Tyler considered this. "I believe that God puts people in our path for a reason. I believe that you were meant to be in that store that day, and I was meant to walk through that door. Everything else, all of this, it was what we built from that moment." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, joys and sorrows. Tyler's uncle passed away, leaving them a portion of the original ranch that they incorporated into their own holdings. Mrs. Abbott retired and sold Clara her shop, which Clara ran with the help of 2 seamstresses she trained. The children grew strong and capable, James learning the ranch business alongside his father, Sarah showing an early talent for working with horses that delighted Tyler. In 1890, Utah Territory moved closer to statehood, and Provo had grown from a small frontier town into a thriving city. Clara and Tyler's ranch was now one of the most successful operations in the region. sprawling across thousands of acres with hundreds of head of cattle and a growing reputation for quality horses. They built a larger house to replace the original cabin, though Clara insisted they keep the cabin intact as a reminder of their humble beginnings. The new house was spacious and comfortable, with a parlor for entertaining, separate bedrooms for the children, and modern conveniences that would have seemed like impossible luxuries to the desperate young woman Clara had once been. But for all their success, Clara and Tyler remained humble and grounded. They still rose early and worked alongside their employees. They still attended church every Sunday and participated in community events. They still remembered what it was like to have nothing, and they never took their prosperity for granted. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Tyler gave Clara a gift that made her cry. He had commissioned a portrait painter to create a new daguerreotype for her mother's locket, a family portrait showing Clara, Tyler, James, and Sarah. On the opposite side, he had kept the original image of Clara's mother. "So your mother can see what her daughter built," Tyler explained as Clara stared at the locket through tears. "So she can see that her sacrifice, leaving you that locket, giving you something to sustain you on your journey, it was not in vain. Look at what came from it, Clara. Look at everything that grew from that one desperate moment when you traded it for food." Clara held the locket, feeling the weight of it, the memories it contained, the symbolism of what it represented. "This locket has been through so much," she said softly. "It survived my journey west, my desperation. It brought us together, and now it holds our family. It is more precious to me than anything else in the world, except for you and our children." "I have a confession to make," Tyler said, a slight smile playing at his lips. "That day in the store when I paid $30 for the locket, it was actually only worth about $20. I overpaid on purpose because I could see you needed help and I wanted Mr. Peters to feel guilty about cheating you." Clara laughed through her tears. "I knew it was not worth $30. I was just so grateful to have it back. I did not care what you paid." They kissed, and Clara marveled at how, after 15 years of marriage, she could still feel butterflies when Tyler held her, could still find new reasons to fall in love with him all over again. As their children grew into young adults, Clara and Tyler began to think about legacy, about what they would leave behind. James, at 20, was already taking on more responsibility at the ranch, showing a natural aptitude for the business and a work ethic that would have made his grandfather proud. Sarah, at 16, was a skilled horsewoman who had begun breeding and training horses with a success that surprised even Tyler. Clara continued her sewing business but had begun teaching young women in the area, passing on the skills her mother had taught her. She thought often about how one act of charity, one moment of compassion from a stranger, had created ripples that continued to spread outward, affecting not just her life, but the lives of everyone she touched. One day in early spring, as Clara and Tyler sat on the porch of their home watching the sun set behind the mountains, Tyler took her hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "The hard road that brought you here, all the suffering you endured before you came to Provo." Clara was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I regret that my parents died so young that they never got to see this life or know their grandchildren. I regret the pain and fear I experienced on that journey, but regret how it ended. Regret that it brought me here to you, to our children, to this life. Never, not for a single moment." "I love you, Clara Ingram," Tyler said. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you in that general store, so desperate and brave, trading away your last precious possession just to survive. I loved your courage then, and I have loved watching it grow and flourish over the years." "And I love you, Tyler Ingram," Clara replied. You gave me back more than my mother's locket that day. You gave me back my dignity, my hope, my future. You gave me everything." They sat together as the stars emerged, hand in hand. Two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, who had built a life and a legacy from nothing but love and determination, and one act of extraordinary kindness. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Winters brought snow and cold, testing their mettle and their preparations. Springs arrived with renewal and birth, new calves and colts, plants pushing up through thawed earth. Summers blazed hot and bright, filled with hard work and long days. Autumns painted the world in gold and fire, bringing harvest and satisfaction. Through it all, Clara and Tyler stood together, their love a constant in a changing world. They watched Utah achieve statehood in 1896, celebrating with their community the culmination of decades of work and sacrifice. They saw Provo continue to grow, transforming from a frontier outpost into a modern city with schools and libraries, churches and businesses. In 1898, James married a sweet-natured girl from town, a banker's daughter named Elizabeth, who quickly proved herself capable of ranch life. They built a house on the property, not far from the main house, and by 1899, Clara and Tyler became grandparents to a squalling baby boy they named Tyler James. Holding her grandson, Clara felt the circle complete itself. From desperate starvation to this, to prosperity and family and legacy, all because a cowboy with a kind heart had walked into a general store at exactly the right moment. Sarah married 2 years later, choosing a young man who had come west to ranch, reminding Clara somewhat of Tyler in his youth, hardworking, honest, and full of dreams. They settled on a portion of the ranch land, building their own small operation with Tyler and Clara's support. As Clara and Tyler entered their 50s, they began to slow down, letting their children take over more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch and the sewing business. They had earned their rest, had built something lasting and good, had raised children who would carry on their values and their legacy. On a warm summer evening in 1905, Clara and Tyler celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary surrounded by family, their children and their spouses, 4 grandchildren with another on the way. Tyler's Aunt Margaret, now elderly, but still sharp as ever, and friends from throughout the years. Standing to make a toast, Tyler raised his glass and looked at Clara with the same love and devotion he had shown since the beginning. 27 years ago, I married the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. She had nothing when we met, but she had everything that mattered: courage, determination, and a heart full of love. She has made me the happiest man alive, given me the greatest gifts a man could ask for, and taught me that true wealth has nothing to do with money and everything to do with love, family, and integrity. Clara stood, her eyes shining with tears, and took Tyler's hand. "You saved my life," she said simply. "And then you gave me a reason to live it. Everything good in my life comes from you, Tyler. You are my hero, my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life." The gathered family applauded, and Clara and Tyler kissed, mindless of the audience, lost in each other as they had been for nearly 3 decades. Later, as the party wound down and the grandchildren were put to bed, Clara and Tyler walked together to the old cabin, preserved exactly as it had been when they first moved in. They did this sometimes, revisiting their beginnings, reminding themselves of how far they had come. Inside the small space, cramped now compared to their current home but still dear, Clara opened her locket, looking at the images inside: her mother on one side, her family on the other, 2 generations connected by silver and love. "I traded this for food once," she said softly. So desperate, so certain I was going to die that this was the end of everything. Instead, it was the beginning, Tyler said, wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. The beginning of us, of everything we built together. You bought it back for me, Clara continued. You gave it back to me, and in doing so, you gave me back myself. You gave me back hope and dignity and a future. You gave me everything, Tyler. We gave each other everything, Tyler corrected gently. You gave me purpose and love and a family. You made me better than I ever would have been alone. We saved each other, Clara. They stood together in the old cabin as darkness fell outside. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had turned desperation into triumph, who had built an empire of love on a foundation of kindness. The years continued to pass with the gentle inevitability of seasons changing. Clara and Tyler grew old together, their hair turning silver, their hands developing the weathered look of a life spent working hard. But their love never diminished, never faded. If anything, it grew stronger, deeper, more profound with each passing year. They lived to see their grandchildren grow up and have children of their own, creating a legacy that spread across the region. The ranch prospered under James's management, growing even larger and more successful. Sarah's horse breeding program became renowned throughout the West. The sewing business Clara had built passed to a talented young woman she had trained, continuing to provide fine work to the community. On a crisp autumn day in 1920, Clara and Tyler sat together on the porch of their home, wrapped in blankets, watching the sun set over the mountains they had loved for so long. They were both in their 70s now, slowed by age but still sharp in mind and devoted to each other. "Do you remember that day?" Clara asked, and Tyler did not need to ask which day she meant. They both knew. "The day I walked into that store, starving and desperate, ready to trade my last possession for food. I remember every detail," Tyler said. "What you were wearing, the look in your eyes, the way my heart broke and then filled all at once when I realized what was happening. You changed everything," Clara said. "One act of kindness, one moment of compassion, and you changed the entire course of my life." "You changed mine too," Tyler reminded her. "I was just existing before you, Clara. You gave me a reason to really live, to build something meaningful, to become the man I always wanted to be." Clara leaned her head on Tyler's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing, the warmth of him beside her. "If I could go back and change anything, do you know what I would change?" "What?" Tyler asked. "Nothing," Clara said firmly. "Not a single moment. Every hardship, every struggle, every desperate moment led me to you, to this life, to our family. I would not change a second of it." Tyler pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Neither would I." They sat together as the stars began to appear, hand in hand as they had been for over 4 decades. Two souls who had found each other at exactly the right moment, who had built something beautiful and lasting from nothing but love and hope, and one man's kind heart. Around them, the ranch bustled with life, their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren going about the business of living, all of them beneficiaries of the love story that had started in a dusty general store in 1878. Clara reached up to touch the locket that still hung around her neck, a constant companion for over 40 years. Inside were the images Tyler had placed there on their 15th anniversary, slightly faded now but still clear, her mother who had given her this talisman, and the family she had built with its help, from starvation to this, from nothing to everything. All because a cowboy with a kind heart had walked into a general store and seen not a desperate vagrant but a woman worth saving, worth loving, worth building a life with. Clara had traded her last possession for food, and the cowboy had bought it back and given her everything: love, family, home, and a legacy that would endure for generations. It was, she reflected, the best trade she had ever made, leading her to the only man who could have given her not just survival, but a life worth living. And as Clara Kennedy Ingram sat beside her beloved husband watching the sun set on another beautiful day in the territory they had helped build, she knew with absolute certainty that every moment of suffering, every desperate decision, every step of that terrible journey west had been worth it. It had all led her here, to this moment, to this man, to this love. She was home. She had been home since the day Tyler Ingram had pressed a silver locket into her palm and given her back not just her mother's memory, but her future. And what a future it had been, full of love and laughter, hard work and triumph, children and grandchildren, and the kind of happiness that comes from building something meaningful with the person you love. As darkness settled over the ranch and the stars blazed overhead, Clara and Tyler went inside together, still hand in hand after all these years, ready to face whatever time they had left exactly as they had faced everything else together. In love, grateful for the beautiful life they had created from that one desperate moment when she had nothing and he had given her everything that truly mattered.